Okay, Facebook's up, YouTube's up. All right. Hello, happy Memorial Day, and welcome to tonight's 8:30 Live. This is actually the second live thing I did today. Somebody actually invited me to do an Instagram live with them earlier, and we had a great conversation for some time. So maybe I'll try and share that. In any event, there's stuff to talk about. That's not, hey, Chris, what's going on? That's not the thing that we were talking about earlier, which again, I'll try and share. But first and foremost, I thought I would just give all of us a little pat on the back because we once again beat the headlines. You might remember that 2 nights ago, we spoke about a Republican who was running for U.S. Senate in Oregon in the primary and is a QAnon conspiracy theorist who looked like she's going to pull ahead. This is Jo Rae Perkins. Well, New York Times just happened to pick it up today that indeed Jo Rae Perkins did win the Republican primary for U.S. Senate and is an unabashedly QAnon supporting conspiracy theorist. Now, we did a whole thing for like half an hour about why this is really important and why the QAnon folks could be the next Tea Party and why that's really bad because the QAnon folks really don't believe in any constraints on Donald Trump, who is a champion of justice, and they live in a world in which any, third term he pushes for, any extrajudicial killing he undertakes, that's all in the service of the ultimate justice corralling the elite cabal, which goes around enslaving and sexually abusing children. So, having folks in Congress who don't believe that Donald Trump can do anything wrong and that every step towards totalitarianism he takes is actually an indication of progress towards rooting out and ferreting out evildoers, that's just dangerous. And mind you, it's all predicated on, in the literature of QAnon, in the talk of QAnon, it's all in military tribunals, and they just release the, what do they call them? Like the dossiers of these people to the public, and then these folks are tried in secret military tribunals, and like that's the actual plan, which is literally how you purge political dissenters on your way to dictatorship. So in any event, New York Times finally picked that up. I find it to be problematic, but we spoke about it 2 nights ago. If you have questions or you want me to review that, just leave a comment, I guess, and we can do it. But otherwise, we'll press on to the new news of the day. But yeah, just Jo Rae Perkins won. Oh, and the one other thing I will mention is a lot of the tying into the Tea Party movement was the fact that Jo Rae Perkins doesn't come out of nowhere. She was the county chair of the Republican Party where she lived in Oregon. And so, running for these small party leadership and local political positions really does help people establish a base that enables them to go on to higher office later. And that can be where all the zany folks outside the mainstream actually go to build power until they come in and replace the existing establishment. That's what the Tea Party did. Just go back and look at all the kooks who won congressional races almost by accident in 2010, and look where it took the Republican Party. And then just look at what's happening with these QAnon folks. Again, there's dozens, according to Media Matters, dozens of these conspiracy theorists running for office in 2020. So, I mean, if they start winning elections to Congress, 1, that's bad for Congress, that's bad for all of us. But 2, it really shows the stranglehold that Donald Trump has on the Republican Party, and it will indicate its full shift to a cult of personality. More QAnon. No. That was just a recap. James Morris King with the comment, more QAnon chat, sign me up. That was a recap of 2 nights ago because we once again on the live beat the mainstream media. New York Times came out with an article today about how Jo Rae Perkins did win the Republican primary for U.S. Senate. So something to watch. Moving on, actually, since we are talking about all of the steps that Donald Trump is taking that could be perceived by the QAnon folks as progress, but are actually terrifying to the rest of us. He tweeted something the other day, which I really wanted folks to know about, because Donald Trump is starting to build the narrative today about the legitimacy of the election in November. And he tweeted, The United States cannot have all mail-in ballots. It will be the greatest rigged election in history. People grab them from mailboxes, print thousands of forgeries, and forces in quotation marks, people to sign. Also, forge names. Some absentee okay when necessary. Probably referring to the fact that he voted absentee ballot many, many times. Trying to use COVID for this scam. So, as you can see, Donald Trump is already out there loud, delegitimizing voting and delegitimizing the results of the 2020 election right now. Now, this is not really new. He's been doing this for a while, talking about voter fraud and immigrants and all this other stuff. But the shift to mail-in ballots has given him a new purchase to cast doubt on whatever results come through in November. And mail-in ballots are a much better, much stronger argument than he had before, because it's a process which a lot of people aren't familiar with. They're unfamiliar with the unbridled success of mail-in ballots for our overseas military members and for many, many states around the country where they allow mail-in ballots and have early voting, but also have voting in person. So it enables him to make a pretty strong argument that the election will be rigged to his followers, and even sow doubt in the minds of folks who wouldn't normally believe things that Trump says, because it's such a removed way of voting for so many Americans. Because, of course, in the United States, you make voting as difficult as possible. So the idea that somebody could come to your mailbox and take your piece of mail seems entirely plausible to a lot of folks. The fact that somebody could come and force you to sign maybe sounds plausible. Now, I will say that once upon a time, a long time ago, I was working an election in New Jersey, and there was a case of mail-in voter fraud. The opposition was known and seen to have gone to public housing development and was exchanging money for votes. But the fact that they got caught is exactly the reason that mail-in voting isn't as big as a problem as you think, because the conspiracy required, the amount of actual public activity that is required to go door to door, knocking on people's homes to try and get them to exchange their vote for money or to sign a ballot that you hand them, is very obvious. It's super obvious. People see you conducting this operation, and in the COVID-19 world, it's going to be very, very odd to have all of these canvassers going around offering to pay folks for their ballot, picking up those ballots to ensure that they are properly marked, because what's the point of a monetary transaction if you can't verify the goods, and asking people to sign. So this really isn't the problem that Donald Trump makes it out to be, of course. And the next step is, obviously, he says some absentee ballot okay when necessary. Well, one, I would argue that it's necessary right now, but two, what makes it okay in those isolated circumstances? Is it that there is much more review? Is it that there is a small enough number that overseeing that process is actually reasonable and feasible? If that's the case, then perhaps Donald Trump should suggest putting lots of federal money behind the mail-in ballot program so that there is adequate staff and we can run the automatic audits of our elections, which election security professionals have been suggesting forever. Not unique to this election, not unique to the 2016 election, but have always been saying you should have risk auditing. Other countries have routine and automatic risk auditing. Why wouldn't we have that here in the United States? That is just one proposal for how to do mail-in balloting and to mitigate any supposed issues with that program or with regular voting, right? So the Republicans, of course, have held up funding for election security in the Senate. That's a big Mitch McConnell thing. Let's not have election security. So it's obviously no surprise that Donald Trump's solution is to cancel voting, not to push for better safeguards and the funding to achieve those safeguards. But really, it's just ludicrous. And if you have any questions about vote by mail and its legitimacy or integrity, please let me know, because we should go over this and understand for ourselves and for people that we run into and that we need to convince why mail-in voting is absolutely fine, can be done in a completely safe and practical way, and is no less valuable or useful than voting in person. In any event, that's Donald Trump. But just know that he is setting the stage now, and he's a master at this. Donald Trump is very good at setting a narrative and using trial balloons to get people thinking about things, and then signaling to his supporters the sort of direction that they should be taking messaging. And for whatever reason, the Republicans have just been really great at this unified messaging, and Donald Trump's a master of trial ballooning things, letting people then iterate on his statements, walking it back for himself to say, I didn't really mean that, or, I was just saying in this context, and then letting that build into full-blown movements. So it's very, very dangerous when somebody like Donald Trump, particularly the president of the United States, comes out and starts casting proactive and preemptive aspersion on our elections, particularly one in which they're running. But okay, so that's two things. Third thing, little pandemic news from somewhere else in the world. Now, one of the major issues with the pandemic is not the virus itself, of course, but the economic consequences. And one of the economic consequences is that people are working from home, vastly depreciating the commercial real estate value of office space and what have you, but also potentially saving corporations massive overhead, right? One of the biggest costs of having a large-scale corporation is the space it takes to house people for the day. If you don't have to hire an office building, if you don't have to rent, I should say, an office building or floor space, then you can really reduce your overhead. However, the result of this is you push that overhead onto your workers. Now, you might say, but people already have homes, so working from home, that doesn't add any cost. But that's not entirely true. It takes up valuable real estate, so to speak, to have a home office. A lot of folks, particularly in New York City, for example, have to make do with very small amounts of space, and permanently setting up home offices reduces the amount of space available for home use. And this is true no matter where you live. You're using up aspects of your home for your business. And in fact, the US tax code recognizes this, because you can write off square footage in your home that's used for business purposes as a business expense. I left my window open today, so it's a bit louder in here, but it's beautiful outside. It's Memorial Day. Unfortunately, it must be all of the beautiful weather that has people partying. There has been more sirens going by than there have been for the last month or so. Now, it's not obviously because of Memorial Day, because that's today, and we won't know for 2 weeks what's going on. Go check out #LOTO, Lake of the Ozarks, on Twitter. But as we saw 2 nights ago with the graphs of New York's hospitalizations due to COVID-19, there have been upticks basically since the weather got good. There was a nadir, there was a low point, and then there was an inflection in places that are currently reopening, like Central New York and the Finger Lakes. And it happened at the end of the month, or at the end of April. And so it probably has to do with people both feeling like the crisis has passed and feeling normal, and also the nicer weather. But that being said, what I wanted to say about the real estate situation is that in Switzerland, there was recently a case, and the United States is not even thinking about this. We're so far away from this, but in Switzerland, there was a case in which an employee sued their employer for rent payment, effectively, because the employer was forcing people to work from home. The employee argued that the corporation should pay a fraction of this person's rent because they are having to allocate space in their home for work. And you know what? They won this lawsuit. And again, the US tax code recognizes the fact that if you're using part of your home for work, that it's a dedicated purpose, and that it takes out space away from what you would normally be doing with it in a home environment. And so I have no idea. I sincerely doubt, honestly, that we're going to get to this place. But, in the United States, but the value, the massive savings that corporations can reap from not having to provide space overhead in urban areas by having people work from home, or by divesting of permanent infrastructure and only renting conference rooms on demand, for example. This is a savings for the corporate entity that really should be passed along to their workers, who will then be required to set aside space and share in their home environment for the work environment. It was particularly important in this Swiss case that it didn't matter whether or not you had purchased a bigger home or rented an extra room for your office. The employer was still required to provide subsidy for your rent, even if you were just working in your living room. So there you have it. Again, I have no idea if we'll get to that point in the United States, because we have a huge difficulty coping with the economic crisis of workers in this country. And that brings us to the last thing I wanted to talk about tonight, because there wasn't that much going on in the news, but still things to talk about. And this is that there was a new survey. This was actually the second COVID-19 pandemic survey from the University of Chicago. And it said that 37% of unemployed people ran out of food in the past month. That is to say, there is massive, rampant hunger insecurity amongst the unemployed. Over a third of people did not have enough food for the month. Beyond this, 2 in 10, 20% of working Americans were food insecure, did not have enough money to buy food for the entire month. They ran out of money, or they ran out of food. No, they ran out of money before they could have, how does that work? They ran out of money before they could afford food. Nope, that doesn't sound right either. I forget exactly how the article put it now, but whatever. It's basically the same thing as saying they just ran out of food and they couldn't afford more of it. That's what happened. So you've now got 20% of employed people, 30% of unemployed people, and an unemployment rate of somewhere hovering around 15 to 20%. I mean, these are numbers in the millions. And honestly, it's very difficult to sort of calculate. You could try and say that, there's 35 million people unemployed. A third of that's like 10 million people. So that's 10 million food insecure folks who are waiting online for food banks or what have you. But it's actually not that way, because some of these people might live together. They might be spouses. And unfortunately, none of that statistic of unemployed people who are food insecure captures families, because children don't work. So when children have guardians or parents who are unemployed, and we're saying that, over a third of all unemployed people are food insecure and unable to feed themselves for the entire month, well, children are just sort of caught up in that number. They could have one child, they could have 6 children. You don't know. So there's a lot of suffering out there right now. Definitely in the millions, if not tens of millions of folks who just don't have enough food. A few more stats out of this article. 28% of workers said that they thought they'd be back to work in the next 30 days. 46% said they thought it would take 3 months, and a further 25% said that it would be between 30 days and 90 days, between 1 and 3 months before return to work. So what that tells you is that almost all of these workers don't really see getting back on the restoring their capacity to make ends meet for at least 2 to 3 months. And that's extremely scary. Another stat, and of course we know that the pandemic affects different constituencies completely unequally, but 1/3 of all Black and 1/3 of all Hispanic families had trouble or were incapable of affording food for the month. 1 in 10 white households had that problem. So we are really talking about a pandemic of economic destitution and a pandemic of hunger and security, as well as this pandemic of illness. I mean, these are just startling numbers. Like, we haven't seen anything like this since, the Great Depression. Really, even the Great Depression didn't ramp up quite this fast. This one food bank, which was interviewed, saw a jump of 60%. People just waiting on lines. We did an episode that's talked about a San Antonio food bank, which was just a wall of cars. And they went from 6 in the morning to like 10 at night trying to get folks food. And they went into their reserve of donated food just to make sure everybody had some. Where these folks are getting their excess food. I mean, the farms are having trouble distributing and all this stuff. So maybe that food is out there, but I don't know for sure whether this is actually sustainable. As long as if nobody's actually buying this food to put it on the table, where are the food banks getting their funding? The government's trying to, particularly in Republican states, governments are trying to wrap up their support of local economies. They're trying to reduce the amount of aid governments are providing. If they're not providing the money, if people aren't working and donating, if they're not providing the money, where are the food banks going to get the resources to compensate the people who are, wholesaling food to them right now or donating food to them right now? Because eventually the farmers also need money. Like, the economy will grind to a halt. It makes you think that maybe those billionaires who have the wealth of not even small countries, but decently large countries, should be getting a bit more involved. In any event, let's see if there's any comments tonight. No, looks like a quiet night. So that's pretty much all I had to say. This is a nice quick one. We had a bunch of people watch though, which is kind of cool. But for some reason, nobody's being vocal tonight. But that's okay. That's okay. It is a holiday. But I do love to hear from everybody. So I hope that tomorrow we'll have one of our wonderful discussions. Although I will say it's always a nice reprieve to not have a live that lasts an hour and 20 minutes, because those are fun. Don't get me wrong. They're fun. They're great. The questions are fantastic. Everybody's weighing in is super great. In fact, I was on an Instagram live today, and the host, Chris, he was saying how on the lives, everybody comments, everybody's weighing in, everybody's participating. But it does take a while. And so I'm going to get dinner at a reasonable hour tonight. So thank you all for stopping by, and I hope to see you tomorrow at 8:30. See you later.